The lighting on Maplewood Lane always seemed a little softer in the early morning, like mist had memories, and the sun was too careful to disturb them. The trees leaned toward each other like old friends, sharing secrets not loud, not urgent, just always listening. On this stretch of familiar sidewalk and sloping porches, nothing much ever changed, until the gifts started showing up. It began with a plastic dinosaur, green, scratched, the kind of toy a toddler might forget under a couch cushion for 3 years. It was curled absurdly at the edge of the Mitchell's porch swing, damp with dew. Then came a rubber duck left on the Green family's welcome mat, tagged with a slobbery bite mark where a wing used to be. Next, someone found a well-worn stuffed bear one I'm missing. It stitched on smiles slightly crooked, propped against their morning paper. At first, people laughed. A fluke, maybe. Kids playing games, swapping things after dark. Maybe the high schoolers getting creative. But when more houses woke to find puzzle pieces, rubber bones, a little red fire truck that still squeaked if you pressed it just right, the laughter became something closer to quiet confusion and wonder. The kind of wondering that stays with you while sipping your coffee and staring out the window longer than you need to. No, one claimed the toys' security cameras blurred in low light. One caught movement shadows, 4 legs, a low shape, not a person, a dog. Impossible, said the chat thread on the Maplewood Mums and Muffins forum. Marvelous, said Mrs. Cranston, who'd lived on the lane since the Beatles were on the radio. A sign, said a kneeling mail carrier who found a squeaky donut on her truck step before dawn. Children, the ones with bruised knees and mouths still full of missing teeth, whispered of magic. We call it the Toy Fairy, Emma Burson declared with a sort of playground authority. No way, countered Jace Ramirez. It's the ghost of recess past. No ghosts, said Milo, with the kind of firm certainty only a very quiet child can manage. His name is Podger. He's real. He has golden fur and he walks out when everyone's asleep. He just gives. Nobody asked how Milo knew that. The small offerings became a ritual, a prayer laid overnight in the hope of being remembered. Children started checking the porch steps first thing, bare feet on the cold wood, not even pausing for breakfast. And if they found something, a red yo-yo inside a cracked teacup, a plush astronaut tucked beside a boot, they ran inside with hearts beating like kettle drums. None of the gifts were new, but each one, somehow, felt like it had chosen them. One mother, a single parent juggling 2 jobs, cried quietly into her coffee the morning her daughter, normally withdrawn, always trailing behind at recess, skipped into the kitchen holding a frayed bunny. Look what I got, she said. I think he knew I needed someone. The girl didn't say who he was, but the whispers grew louder. The Toy Fairy, the night gifter, the soft pod one. None of it made sense, but nobody really wanted it to not completely. Sometimes mystery is better left tenderly intact, folded neatly into a community's shared story, like a soft blanket you don't need to understand to feel warm under. Late one evening, Nora Hanley stood at her curtain, sipping chamomile and watching the street. Her house was tucked near the end of Maplewood, next to a thick cluster of blackberry brambles and one weary street lamp. She thought, for a moment, she saw movement, something small, gold, but when she looked again, nothing stirred. She thought of the times she and her husband used to sit on this porch with their grandchildren, watching bubbles pop in the dusk, count fireflies, name clouds. That was years ago. They wrote letters now, sent drawings, video chats, Sometimes the house was quieter these days, still filled with love, yes, but love spoke in slower, softer ways now, through fresh bread, through garden rows, through silence, and, lately, through mystery. Before slipping into bed, she opened the front door, just to be certain she hadn't imagined it earlier. The mat looked, as it always did, faded from summers of welcome. One corner flipped a tiny bit from the wind, but there, off to the side, nestled in a thumb-sized patch of lichen, was a toy train. Its little red paint dulled around the edges, but its windows still glinted in the porch light. It had no note, no wrapping, only a trace of something else. Warmth. She bent slowly, picked it up, turned it over in her palm. It smelled like morning grass, and something kind she couldn't place. Down the street, a dog barked once. Not sudden, not loud, just enough to be known. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about toys. It was about remembering the feeling of being chosen. And somewhere in the quiet turns of a quiet corner street, that feeling had begun to bloom. Again slowly, like ivy on old brick, or hope at the edge of an ordinary Thursday. The Hanleys' front gate clicked lazily when it opened, the kind of sound that had been heard so often it had blended into the background hum of Maplewood Lane. Most folks passed their house without noticing more than the curling ivy on the mailbox or the roses Mrs. Hanley tended with an almost reverent devotion. But within the low picket fence, beneath the bowed limbs of a sugarberry tree, lived a soul who saw more than most people ever would. Buttons was a golden retriever. Though time had worn down the luster of his coat and left a curt bend in his tail, an old injury from chasing a squirrel too fervently many years ago, his eyes, however, remained untouched by age. They were deep, endlessly so, as if he'd stored every memory and every feeling he'd ever witnessed behind them. He had lived with the Hanleys since the days when the grandkids used to visit every weekend, when the backyard echoed with squeals, and sprinkler giggles, and toys were left scattered like breadcrumbs across the grass. Buttons had adored those days. He was younger then, full of bounce, chasing tennis balls, stealing socks, curling beside small legs under picnic tables. But children grow and moves happen. And now the toys stayed packed away in bins in the attic. The yard was tidy, empty. Still, Buttons had adjusted outwardly. He still walked, still dozed in sun patches, still greeted the mail carrier with a traditional bark, but within, something had dimmed. The house had grown quieter, and Buttons, in dog-language ways that words can't quite touch, felt it. The shift began on a soft-skid Tuesday. Buttons had noticed the boy before, a small figure in mismatched shoes, who sat each afternoon on the curb across from the Hanleys' garden. No books, no ball, just stillness, sometimes swinging a string between his fingers, sometimes just staring. That day, the boy's head was lowered more than usual. A stray balloon drifted lazily down the street, a bright orange one, its ribbon dragging like a tired tail. Buttons watched it roll past, then looked back at the boy. The way his shoulders hunched told a story, one of absence, of anticipation, not met. Something tugged in Buttons' chest, a kind of memory call. He turned toward the shed. Behind it, nestled beneath a warped panel of fencing that had once played the role of castle turret or pirate dock, Buttons had a cache, the blue kiddie pool, long outgrown and forgotten by human hands, served as his secret trove. There lay a ragtag orchestra of relics, tennis balls chewed to silence, frisbees fringed like sea urchins, plushes who had lost eyes or limbs in battle, and a rubber hamburger that still oozed a whisper of its squeak. He stood there, nose quivering, over the options. Finally, he chose an old tennis ball, mud-dotted, its green fuzz faded to sage. Still, it was round, familiar, friendly. That night, Buttons waited until the Hanleys fell asleep. He could always tell by the rhythm of their breathing, then nudged the side gate with practiced care. It creaked open, and he slipped into the sheltering dark. He padded across the street, the ball held confidently in his jaws, and placed it at the tip of the boy's doorstep. Not on the mat. No, gently, just beside a rain-worn flower pot. He paused, watching the window. No light, number, stir. Just possibility. The next morning, Buttons waited by the flower bed with an awkward, unspoken type of hope. From beneath the lilac bush, he watched as the boy opened his door. There was a beat of hesitation, then a blink, then a smile, not wide, not toothy, but real. A first crack in the overcast. Buttons didn't wag or bark. He just felt the warmth ripple inside and turned to amble back toward his breakfast bowl. The next night, it was a plush fish. A ridiculous orange thing that had been called funky tuna by one of the Hanley grandkids back in some summer long gone. Buttons carried it gingerly, ignoring a half-interested raccoon, and deposited it at the feet of another house. Here, a girl had been sitting all week, by herself on the front stoop, tracing her shoe edges with a stick. Days passed, and the quiet deliveries grew dot. Each evening, Buttons plucked an item from the kiddie pool, sniffed it, turned it over with his nose, and each night, he loped softly through his neighborhood, choosing doorsteps like a gardener chooses where flowers might bloom best. He never took anything from the houses. He only left things behind, 2 buttons. The logic was simple. The house was quiet because the children had gone. But maybe they weren't gone, just hiding, or waiting, or remembering how to play. He remembered how it felt to be important. Not just noticed, or fed, or pet, but essential. The funny thing about love, he'd come to believe, is that it doesn't need to be mutual to be needed. And choosing to give, that was the only kind of choosing he had left. He knew which toys had been given to him with giggles. He remembered the girl who used to tug his ears gently while feeding him crackers, and the boy who slept beside him after long days in the park. Each toy in the pool held the echoes of those memories. When he picked one, it wasn't just a thing, it was a story, one he was giving forward. The Hanleys, for their part, didn't yet know what Buttons was doing. They did notice he seemed lighter. Lately, more engaged. Walking a bit farther, tail fluttering instead of dragging. They smiled to see it, chalking it up to vitamin supplements and warmer spring air. But Buttons knew. He knew what a purpose tasted like. It tasted like focus, and dusk wind in your fur, and the small thrill of laying something down softly, knowing it might mean the world to someone in the morning. The first to notice the pattern was Ava Chen, age 7.5, who kept a notebook full of observations written in glitter gel pen. On Wednesday morning, she circled the red plastic race car she found on her doormat. By Friday, it was a purple squeaky pig. "Someone's leaving me clues," she whispered to her brother, who rolled his eyes but secretly started peeking at the porch each day. 2. Across the street, the Ramirez twins found a Fisher-Price drill lying atop the handrail, like it had been placed with ritual care. On the sidewalk chalkboard outside Ms. Cranston's reading nook, someone had scrawled in bold bubble letters, Toy Fairy is real. Children began forming alliances. Toy tallying became a morning mission. Some kept score. Others made graphs. One child hypothesized it was a hamster overlord with a toy collection. But more and more, they returned to the tale of the four-legged bringer of joy. Emma Burson left a granola bar on her welcome mat, carefully wrapped with a sticky note that read, "Thank you for the bear." She drew a heart and a paw print. Milo left a hand-drawn portrait, just a scribble, really, but with big yellow ears on, taped it to his window. Nobody knew where the toys had come from. But they knew, somehow, that they were not just toys. Each had clearly been loved before bite marks. Missing tags, the smudges of something like peanut butter on a toy tambourine, but they carried a scent of story. They didn't feel like donations. They felt like gifts, chosen with care, even affection. Parents, at first amused, began to grow perplexed. They checked their own closets. No missing items. Security cameras still caught only blurs, low movement, fleeting shapes between lamplights, the slight scuffle sound of paws on brick. The neighborhood forums lit up with theories. Ghost dog, mischievous raccoon, art installation. One dad claimed it was his kids pranking the street, until he realized none of the toys belonged to them. Another swore he heard scratching at the fence. Near 4 a.m. but when he ran outside, only silence remained, save for the rustling of early robins. What no one could explain was the effect. Children who had stopped speaking in class started whispering again, sharing tales of what had arrived. One girl tucked the gifted soldier figurine into her coat pocket and didn't take it out for 3 whole days, holding it like a secret. A boy who rarely laughed stood up at show and tell and declared, "Poja is watching out for us. He finds the toy you need, not the one you want." At breakfast tables and bedtime talks, parents listened as their children spoke of kindness, of magic, of being chosen. Mrs. Ahmed, who worked nights and rarely saw her twins during the week, came home one morning to find them curled on the couch, showing each other their porch toys, an action figure and a broken remote control car, both clearly grinning with battle scars. "He comes," one of them said. "He knows whose turn it is." And so households changed. Doors were checked more often. Curtains pushed aside before dawn. Some even left porch lights on throughout the night, hoping not out of skepticism, but out of invitation. The presence, gentle and untouchable, had become part of Maplewood's rhythm. Kids raced outside, not for packages, but possibility. Jackie Weber, a 4th grader with a severe stutter, found a plushy dinosaur propped against her bike tire. Its tag long torn away, but its smile, crooked like hers, intact. That morning, for the first time in months, she spoke an entire sentence to her neighbor. "Maybe he thinks I'm brave like him." Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years began to nod again when they saw each other on morning walks. There was a slight softening like fabric worn smooth in places by familiarity. Through the street's usual chill, laughter came. Easier outside. Cranky mornings, a little less so. Danny Dawson, 10 and skeptical of anything remotely sentimental, found a box of Jacks balanced on his porch railing. He didn't understand it. He didn't even like Jacks. But when he brought it to school, Clara Montgomery, quiet, bookish, always alone by the tuba locker saw, and smiled for the first time in weeks. "That used to be my favorite game," she said. He handed it to her without thinking. A soft chain of something had started to form. The children began to leave things in return offerings, almost not big, not loud, but sincere. Stickers taped to railing, chalk paw prints leading to driveways. crayon hearts tucked inside tiny sandwich bags. Milo left a dog treats, not the crunchy kind, but the chewy chicken one he used to give his aunt's lab, embellished with glitter tape, because, as he explained quietly, good boys deserve extras. Still, no grown-up had spotted the visitor. It's not that they weren't trying. Security cameras were rewound faithfully. Flashlights flicked on at suspected hours, but the presence remained elusive, uncaught, and maybe that was how it had to be. In living rooms, conversations unfolded in hushed reverence. It's something good, parents admitted, almost guiltily. Whoever is doing this, it's kind. In one house, a teen who hadn't looked his younger sister in the eye for 6 months smiled when she showed off the astronaut plush that appeared on their porch wrapped in Tuesday's comics. In another, a tired mother realized her son had been going outside before she woke, not to run away, but to wait quietly for whichever forgotten treasure might brighten his morning. The gifts weren't about the toys. They were reminders, quiet, deliberate ones, that someone out there noticed. You picked something just for you, left no note, because the note had already been written into the act. Behind the Hanley's shed, where the grass grew a little wilder and clover patches gathered like whispered conversations, there was a place only Buttons knew. The blue kiddie pool had been stiff with sun and scratchy with age, even when the youngest Hanley grandchild still needed help stepping into it. Back then, it was filled with water, plastic boats, and laughter so loud it made birds scatter from the trees. Now, it sat empty of everything but memory, unless you counted Buttons' collection. In the cradle of the shallow basin, under a loose flap of tarp and a ruffle of fallen leaves, were the toys. So many, in various stages of softness and wear, some dulled by time, some holding on to their colors with stubborn grace. None of them new, but all of them loved once. There was the green rubber frog missing one leg, a pull-string lamb with no more pull, who still smiled like she expected lullabies at any moment, a pink sock with a knotted end that once had smelled like peanut butter. Buttons had saved them all, not because he needed them, but because he remembered who they had belonged to. He sniffed over the pile now, pausing beside a bear with a stitched blue heart. That one, he remembered, had been hugged tightly during thunderstorms by the sweet, curly-haired girl who used to hide under the table during storms. She moved to Arizona 3 years ago. The bear hadn't moved since. Beside the bear was a dinosaur, ridged down the back, a chew taken out of its tail where Buttons himself had once gotten overexcited during a game of tag. There was guilt in that bite, and affection to dot each toy a chapter. Each scuff or nibble or faded patch, a line from a summer now folded away. Buttons sat quietly, pouring the edge of the pool, noses brushing the edges like turning pages. Some nights, it took him a while to choose. He'd nudge a Super Bowl, then a threadbare doll, and settle, perhaps, on a squeaky hot dog, missing half the squeak. It wasn't random. Not to him. There was always a reason certain toys went out. Something about the shape of the day, the tone of the laughter or lack thereof, the lawns, the way a particular child kicked a stone too hard on the walk home from school. He could sense it. He could feel which toy held the right weight of comfort, of delight, of memory. Buttons didn't just give toys. He gave emotions wrapped in fuzz and rubber and fray. One plush octopus still smelled faintly of the creek behind the park, where it had once been swung gleefully by a boy who later cried quietly the day he left for boarding school. Another probably small cowboy hat on a Velcro band remounted. buttons of tea parties and sticky lemonade mustaches. The toys weren't buried like bones. They were curated. It was strange, in a way, how deeply he remembered. How these items carried with them not just ownership, but feeling. He remembered the weight of heads resting beside him in the grass, or the gentle patting of hands too small to be rough. Love didn't depart when people left, not entirely. It just waited, soaked into these objects like sun into old curtains, each night before choosing. Buttons would sit for a moment and look out toward Maplewood Lane. He listened not for noise, but for quietness, for hesitations, for spaces where something might be missing. Sometimes the toys were just toys, but even then they filled a gap. Sometimes they were something more, a reply to a wish unspoken to Buttons that mattered. He remembered the first time the youngest Hanley boy had given him a toy not handed, no, left on a blanket, expectantly, near Buttons' curled paws. It had been a blue elephant. The boy had said nothing, just nodded once, and Buttons had understood. It was a gift, a trust offering, a friendship sealed by polyester and promise. Later, when the children stopped coming as often, he had waited, at first hopeful, then quiet, then tired, but never without feeling. The toys stayed behind, cluttered in small bins, then sorted for goodwill, though some had escaped in the corners of sheds, under garden benches, in the kiddie pool left unattended one summer, too brittle to rescue. Buttons had pulled them together slowly, at first for comfort, then for keeping, eventually for others. He didn't mourn what was lost, but he honored it. That's why the gifting began. Not because anyone told him to, not because he expected anything back, but because the house had been too quiet, and he remembered what it felt like to be part of someone's laugh. He still wanted that for someone else, even when the gate creaked too loud, or the knees stiffened, or the fur on his paws came back muddy. The mission mattered. He had made his choice to find the old joys and help them bloom again on new porches, on tender thresholds, in the hearts of children learning what it felt like to be seen. Back at the shed, the blue frog lay still in the fading light. Buttons passed it. Over this time, something else called to him, a patchwork snake with unraveled tongue and mismatched button eyes. It smelled like summer grass and vanilla shampoo and the exact tone of laughter that used to echo off the trampoline. He picked it up carefully as reverence could allow, and turned toward the open gate once more. The morning was quiet. Clouds smudged across the sky like someone had dragged their sleeve through the blue. Sparrows chattered in hushed rhythm, unhurried, as though even they were waiting for something soft to begin the day. But on Maplewood Lane, a small but significant absence had taken root. No toys, no surprises tucked inside flower pots or nestled beneath porch lights. No plush animals on railings, no tiny cars angled toward doormats like faithful sentinels. The porches remained plain, the lawns undisturbed, and the children noticed. More than anyone, Jace sat on his front step in socked feet, staring at the empty mat like it might eventually explain itself. Across the street, Emma kicked at a pebble so hard it pinged off her mailbox and rolled under a neighbor's car. Milo stood beside his mum's lilac bush and frowned, nose nearly touching the petals. "He's gone," he whispered. No one asked. Who, inside one of the homes, a little girl refused her cereal until she had checked every inch of the yard twice. Her shirt was on backwards. Her eyes were full of questions she didn't quite know how to shape. And in another house, a father stood by the window long after the coffee went cold in his hand, wondering strangely why his chest felt tighter than it had in months. Under the covers, a seventh grader, pixelated by loneliness, pulled the astronaut plush closer. "Not today," he murmured into its stuffing. And not just about the toy. Somewhere nearby, in the Hanleys' home, Buttons stood by the side gate and pawed it gently. The latch rattled, unmoved. He backed up a step, tried again, then sat back on the stone path and blinked once at the wooden slats above it was closed, and not just the kind of closed a nudge could fix. The kind that needed fingers. Hinges latched in a way that said, "Not tonight." Mr. Hanley must have forgotten to swing it open after pulling weeds in the back garden. Late spring always meant mulching days, and mulching days ended with tired legs and early sleep. Buttons looked down the path, across the lawn, toward the corner of the fence where shadows usually stretched just right when the moon got high. But the way was blocked. He whined once, not loud, not with the full weight of frustration, just enough for the stars to notice. He paced a little, not in panic, but in patience. A few steps back and forth, a soft look toward the shed. Back at his pool, the snake still sat where he had left it, expectantly grinning with lopsided button eyes. But he didn't go back to it. He stayed at the gate, waiting, not because he thought someone would come, but because being ready felt better than not, inside. Mr. Hanley stirred in his sleep. A breeze moved the curtain laced against the window. The garden lights flickered once, and out beyond the gate, a good dog waited through his missionless night by morning. The quiet on Maplewood Lane pressed in. Children hesitated a little longer before going inside. Parents asked soft questions, carefully, the way one speaks about broken magic. On one porch, a pair of rain boots held a note. "Dear toy dog, we missed you today. If you got lost, we can help." It was signed with a finger-smudged paw print and the name Lyle in crooked backward R's. Elsewhere, sidewalks bloomed again in chalk art, some of it bright and cheerful, rainbows, flowers, lopsided balloons. But as the hours curled forward, more drawings appeared with dogs, golden ones, with capes, with toys in their mouths and sparkles in their tails, in front of the Burson's house. A choir of tiny children gathered and began to hum a made-up tune meant to call back the poor fairy. They didn't know the words, but sang just the same. It was Milo, quiet Milo, who slid a drawing into the metal slit of the Hanleys' mailbox. A simple picture. A dog, curved tail, a heart in its mouth. Below it he wrote, "If he's yours, tell him we miss him. Love, everyone." Mrs. Hanley found it first. She had gone out for the morning paper and saw the folded paper wedged beside coupons and credit card ads. She didn't open it right away. Something about it made her want to step carefully. She sat at the kitchen table, toast forgotten beside her, while the drawing pressed quietly into her palm. A dog, dot with a crooked tail, Buttons. It came like a soft tug in her stomach. She looked out. The window toward the gate, toward the shed, and something clicked. A memory formed frayed at the edges, but clear in its center, of how Buttons had found that old frog toy last year, dug it up, brought it proudly to her like it was buried treasure. She'd laughed at the time. Given the toy a place on the stairs, she'd thought it was a funny quirk. Now she was less sure. Later that afternoon, Mr. Hanley came inside with dirt on his sleeves and worry on his face. "Did you close the gate last night?" "Not on purpose," he admitted. "Just forgot to unlatch it, I think." Mrs. Hanley held up the paper. There's something you should see." On Saturday morning, Mr. Hanley woke up before the kettle whistled. The sky beyond the kitchen window was still the color of unmarked paper, and the dew on the lawn glistened like thoughts not yet spoken. Buttons was already awake, head resting. On his paws, ears twitching with a listening that went beyond sound. Nora stood beside her husband in silence, as he rewound the footage from the small camera he'd set discreetly near the shed. He hadn't meant to catch Buttons doing anything wrong, only to understand. A suspicion had grown over the past few days, watered by chalk drawings, notes in the mailbox, and the same question blooming behind all the children's eyes. The footage played on a tired old tablet, grainy in its clarity, but impossible to misread. There he was, Buttons, one night, then another, slipping through the garden after the gate was left ajar, a toy clutched firmly in his mouth. His tail swayed not with force, but conviction. A silent march of joy. He paused at corners, scanned from porch to porch, as though choosing not just where, but who. By the third clip, Mr. Hanley's throat had gone tight. On the fourth, he reached for Nora's hand. They didn't speak for a while, didn't need to. Later that day, Mr. Hanley walked the length of the fence and unlatched the side gate, not with guilt, but reverence. He placed a small sticker on the wood green, shaped like a paw. Buttons followed him, tongue lolling slightly, not understanding the symbol, only that the way was open again. Then Nora got to work. The plan was quiet, gentle, not a grand announcement. Not a spectacle, just the truth, unwrapped, left out like sugar for tea. She placed an empty cardboard box behind the shed, pinning a note to the top. For Buttons missions, toy donations appreciated. Beneath it, she drew a small heart beside a curved tail. No signature. Buttons, watching nearby, sniffed once and nudged the box gently with his nose, as if recognizing an invitation. By evening, the cardboard was full, not with new toys. No, these were old favorites, retired plushes, scuffed figurines, cars with only 3 working wheels, but hearts full of stories. Nora smiled as she lifted a tiny plastic rocket ship with glitter still clinging to its edges. She imagined where it might end up. Mr. Hanley sent a message to a few longtime neighbors, not with fanfare, just a quiet line. "Join us tomorrow morning at the park for something special. Bring the kids." Sunday bloomed early. The sun, humbler than usual, broke with a soft hush and settled gently over Maplewood Park. The swings creaked slowly in the breeze. The grass, damp but welcoming, bore the weight of folding chairs, picnic blankets, and curious shoes. Families gathered in clumps. Children clutched the tokens they'd found on their porches bears, spaceships, rubber bones. Some wore them tucked under arms, others proudly displayed. All waited with the buzz of uncertain wonder. Mr. Hanley stepped forward with Buttons at his side. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but sure. "We think it's time you met your toy giver." He looked down at Buttons. Buttons looked up, ears perked, tail wagging once, as though sensing the shape of what this meant. "His name is Buttons," Nora added, stepping beside them. "And I think he's been choosing you all for longer than we knew." At first, only the rustle of breath moved through the crowd, a soft rising like wind through birch leaves, then dash, clapping small, then more, not polite, but real, a beat made of belief. Children darted forward, not to swarm Buttons, but to kneel beside him, lay their toys at his feet like offerings in reverse. Milo placed the drawing he'd made, now slightly rumpled, on the grass. Emma whispered something inaudible, then kissed the top of Button's head. Jace offered his plush raccoon. "Trade you," he said. Buttons sniffed it, then rested his paw lightly atop it. More children came forth, each one not requesting, but returning, gifting back something of the tenderness they'd once been given. Buttons stood steady at the center of it all, calm, peaceful, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The way porchers wait for Sunday morning breeze. A girl, her hair in lopsided braids, leaned close, hands folded like prayer. "Thank you," she said, not loud, not in ceremony, but with raw, unfiltered sincerity, the kind that doesn't need microphones. Mr. Hanley cleared his throat. "If anyone would like to help Buttons keep up his deliveries, we've left a box out back. Any old toy with joy still in it." A smile tightened the corners of his mouth. "Because it seems we've all got more to give than we think." That afternoon, in the dappled light of maple branches, something new grew old roots. Laughter laced with awe, stories shared between parents who hadn't spoken since back-to-school night. Chalk sketches blooming on the walking path, dog paws, stick figures, swirling spirals of yellow and gold, and Buttons lying on his side near the sandbox, kids around him, not barking, not begging, simply being, as if sharing the weight of his joy had made it lighter, as though he already knew. This was no longer just his mission. It had become the neighborhood's. That spring, the invitations were delivered not by envelopes, but by whispers. Playground murmurs, clicks between neighbors at mailboxes, scribbled notes in pencil margins. "There's going to be a parade," someone said. For him. The word passed from yard to yard like a wind crumbled, secret soft, but impossible to ignore. At the center of the idea was Emma, who told her mother one evening, in the serious tone used only by those who know the importance of ceremony, "We should march for Buttons. He brings us things. We should bring him something too." What followed wasn't polished, not grand, just children plotting kindness with crayons and sidewalk chalk. Ms. Cranston offered the community center lawn. The Webbers brought folding chairs. Someone donated lemonade. And just like that, the first paw parade was born, not crafted by a committee, but nurtured into being by small hands with bright hearts. On a sun-tumbled Saturday, the families gathered. There was no band, but a Bluetooth speaker crooned old favorites near the statue of the town's founder. No permits were asked for, but somehow the roads politely cleared. The children arrived dressed in animal ears and tails, faces painted like whiskered knights. But most importantly, each child held a stuffed animal or old favorite toy-issued from closets, rescued from bin limbo, honored as if they were precious jewels. They walked not in strategic lines, but organically. Kids bouncing, skipping, some wobbling on roller skates, clutching bears and rabbits, aliens and dolls, each held high in procession. A slow, delightful tide of soft things and softer spirits. And leading them all, proudly padding ahead, was Buttons, around. His neck was a scarf, hand-painted with paw prints and stars. His tail wagged, not with his usual slow sway, but in great, unself-conscious loops. At times, he paused and sniffed at hands reaching down. At others, he simply walked with quiet purpose, a gold-flecked beat at the heart of it all. Along the route, there were cheers, signs clapping from grandmas on porches. Some waved paper flags that read Captain Pauger. Others held up poster boards stamped with painted paws and glitter. The The children chanted songs not rehearsed, but felt. Lyrics mixed like lemonade, sugary, a little wild. Hooray for Buttons. He gives, we dance. Toys for all, tales for days. Nora stood by the refreshment table, heart nearly too full to look directly at him. And next to her, Mr. Hanley blinked away, something caught in his eyes as Buttons paused, turned toward them and blinked back. They had given this dog a backyard, a roof, steady care, but he had taken it upon himself to become more. As the parade circled the playground and looped past the poppies blooming near the stone bench, a small group broke off to approach the toy drive box set up near the gazebo. Children lined up quietly, not asked, not told, each gently placing an offering inside. A sparkled dragon missing a wing, a duck plush mended at the neck, a transformer with a single movable arm, their best-loved things, given freely, not because they no longer mattered, but because they had, and that made them worth passing on. A girl with tangled pigtails whispered, "Make sure Buttons picks the right one. That bear can only sleep on porches with stars." Milo helped sort them into neat rows, grouped, not by size or brand, but by feel. Someone had added a sign beside the box, for future givers. Later that afternoon, under the canvas tent borrowed from the Greer family's camping stash, Mr. Hanley gathered the kids and told them stories of Buttons when he was younger, running face first into a garden hose, stealing pancakes off a paper plate, falling asleep with train sets draped over his back at Saturdays full of laughter. The children listened, spellbound, not because the stories were dramatic, but because they were offered with love. Nearby, Buttons dozed beneath the shade of an oak tree, head nestled in a nest of ribbon and toy stuffing. One of the Burson twins had tucked a daisy into his scarf. A newspaper reporter came to take photos, prompted by a neighbor's tip. She crouched before the scene, camera low, then simply lowered it and watched instead, because some moments are too quiet to capture and too large not to feel. No. One asked how long the tradition would last. They just knew they wanted to come back next year and the year after that, whether or not Buttons was still the one placing gifts beneath flower pots. Even if, someday, the deliveries stopped, the stories would not. Along Maplewood Lane, pastel paw prints began appearing again in chalk, not from Buttons, but from children. A trail of remembrance, an echo of where love once wandered, and back. Behind the shed, the cardboard box remained, not empty, never empty again. The seasons turned slowly on Maplewood Lane, like an old record spinning gently toward the end of a favorite song. The rose bushes that once bowed with dew now stood taller, more settled. Sidewalks bore new chalk lines each spring, even if the hands drawing them changed. And while the porches still watched the mornings unfold, not all of them did so with toys waiting nearby. Buttons had grown older by then, carefully, like good dogs do. His face, once golden and smooth, had taken on shades of silver and soft cream. His walk was slower, his naps more frequent. He made his way up the steps of the Hanleys' porch with a bit more care and paused longer between wagging his tail. But his spirit had not dimmed. He still basked in the laughter at the park, listening from beneath the lilac bush by the bench. He still watched the children gather at the yearly paw parade, carried now more by tradition than by his own steps. Some of the neighborhood kids had become teenagers. A few had moved, but none forgot. The toy box behind the Hanleys' shed wasn't always full anymore, but it was never fully empty. Sometimes a single plush turtle, its shell mended neatly at the seam, sat in the shade where Buttons had once chosen his offerings. Some weeks passed with no additions, but others brought odd gifts, sticker-covered robots, well-loved sock puppets, the occasional lopsided foam crown. Buttons stopped delivering sometime in late autumn. No fanfare, no final toy left behind, just a cool evening where the wind whispered through the garden, and Buttons lay a while longer on the porch watching the last crimson leaves fall across the lawn. That night, in his slow and quiet way, he didn't nudge the gate open. He simply curled beneath the wooden swing and listened. The next morning, Maplewood Lane woke up to another day. The sun touched the roofs just like always. But something was missing. The Hanleys wrote a letter. They didn't post it on a forum. They printed a few copies and placed them gently in mailboxes, tucked between grocery coupons and library newsletters. It was folded neatly in quarters, and at the top, it simply read, "In memory of Buttons." It wasn't a long letter, but every word held weight. Buttons taught us that joy can be simple, that presence is a gift, and love doesn't always need language, that giving small, silly, slobbery gifts can hold entire memories inside them. He believed in laughter on porches and second chances for toys. He believed in all of you. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for seeing what we were lucky enough to live beside. Signed, Nora and Walter Hanley. Under the great maple tree at the edge of the park, a wooden bench appeared by the weekend. It wasn't there before, just appeared as community. Things often do built by a collective will and a few good intentions. Sanded smoothly, varnished by hand. Etched into the wood were just a few words, in loving memory of Buttons, the giver of joy. Children came that week with toys once again. They placed them gently on the bench, never in tribute, never with ceremony, just ... gently. A race car, a tiny scarf, a rubber donut. Some stayed for a day or two, others much longer. No one stole or cleaned them away. It was like the bench had been given its own purpose, now to hold offerings meant for remembering. Milo came first. He, now nearly 10, walked up with the drawing he'd made years ago, laminated now. The ink faded a bit. He tucked it beneath a small plastic turtle and sat in silence for a while. He didn't cry, but he didn't need to speak either. Others followed. They didn't come in crowds. They came as memories called them, after school, on lazy weekends, during quiet strolls with backpacks heavy and thoughts heavier. People began calling it the Buttons bench, and when pressed, the younger children, ones too new to remember the original gifts, were told the story. Gently, like a fairy tale but real. A golden dog with a funny tail and kind eyes, who gave away his toys in the night, who knew which porch needed what, and who never waited to be thanked. The tale never changed much, because it didn't need to. Years went on. Toy deliveries became rarer than only remembered, but the story never fell silent. Maplewood Lane held on to it. The Hanleys now hosted the Paw Parade each spring, even if Buttons no longer walked at its front. Some waved from windows now instead of walking, but still they came. And for all the children who had once received a toy they needed more than they realized, the memory remained just as vivid, shaped like a tennis ball, or a squeaky duck, or a bear missing one. It was never really about the toys. It was always about being chosen, and as long as the memory of Buttons lived on the bench, in the parade, within the laughter of children, it would always be so.